Okay, everyone, this is Yi from Texas Tech. So thank you all for joining this session. So before we start, let's imagine a simple scenario. Imagine our guys, we are like a developer just launched like an AI legal assistant like Harvard. So instead of in old days that we need to train and learn our foundation model ourselves, nowadays, we can just use the OpenAI, the foundation model, like already built, and just use this for our model training, and just probably create a app just probably in a week. So that's a super costless, and also it saves a lot of time for creating different apps. But here is actually a dilemma. So consider your customer. So they are like interacting or writing prompts with your apps, and the data they're gonna to have interaction with your app gonna to flow back to the foundation model provider, and this somehow creates a trade-off here. So the data which is your valuable resource can gonna to be actually help your competitor like OpenAI to better train their foundation model. So it could happen that in one day your customer come in and say that, hey, I just asked a question to ChatGPT and asked you the same question. The ChatGPT actually gave me a better answer. So the simple question here is, how is that? So probably for Harvard or other developers who are developing domain-specific models, they're thinking about OpenAI, you couldn't train my data because that's my valuable resource. So I need to opt out from contributing from the foundation model training. But here is a question mark. So we're trying to study whether this kind of promising approach, whether there are any hidden costs for that. So if we just stop the kind of data flowchart sharing, will this foundation model actually become lower quality? And also, how about the price change, or will consumer really take granted or take benefit from this kind of policy change? So this is a joint work with Zhe from City University of Hong Kong and Xinxin from University of Connecticut. So they are hundreds or thousands of miles from us, but they're still with us. Okay, so this is still ongoing work. So any feedbacks or comments, I really appreciate it. So nowadays, lots of people were, especially in this conference, I don't need to motivate about Gen AI and how it is important nowadays. So for foundation model provider, they're actually generating two different revenue sources. So one is very intuitive. So like me, I subscribe to OpenAI for about $20 per month. So that's a direct subscription price they can charge. And another one that is somehow kind of ignored by many people, that is they actually generate a lot of revenue from licensing APIs. So like Harvard or other Jasper AI, they don't need to really launch their own foundation model. They can just pay probably some dollars and then use the foundation model provided by those large companies. So those, according to some references, the API-related services actually generate about $1.4 billion for OpenAI. So that's actually huge. So nowadays, because of the dilemma we just talked about in the motivating story, so lots of providers are kind of suing OpenAI. You cannot use my data for training. That's also for no longer for their competitive advantage, but also for customer privacy. Because if you train some private data, the customer from Harvard may come back to them saying that, how do you collect my data, and probably misuse it. So there's a kind of timing here. So before March 2023, actually default policy by OpenAI is they can automatically train developers' data for sure, unless you just opt out. So, but actually, no one maybe really cares, so they automatically train their data. But after this timing, there's a new policy where they say that, developer, you cannot train my data. So all the data that is submitted or generated by my side, you cannot train it by default, unless I choose to opt in. But usually, people do not choose to opt in usually. So what is the trade-off over here we're trying to discuss about? So like we said, so if the data cannot be trained towards or trained upward to the foundation model providers, that's kind of alleviate consumers' privacy concern, because we're saying I can safely use your service. I don't need to worry about my data gonna to be disclosed or misused at some place. But at the same time, because OpenAI, they don't collect enough data, because as a valuable resource, I couldn't collect enough those resources to keep training or improving my foundation model quality. That somehow, when you use API as a license to my model, it may actually also hurt you. So there's a kind of to be a balance or a trade-off between those two different forces. And also, not only for OpenAI, there are also other, foundation model providers that are behaving differently. Like, for example, like DeepSeek, they are still adopting the default policy where it actually didn't disclose whether I train your data or not. But, we just think about like they just train automatically. So they actually don't have a disclosed policy regarding this. So here, let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into how this market works. So we have a third-party developer who is developing some domain-specific apps. And we also have some foundation model providers who are providing some general-purpose app model. And we have the model provider. They can provide them with the model. And if you have more data, they can actually provide better performance model for sure. And then, like the developer, they can give the data for them to train. But probably with the new policy, they couldn't they would not choose to give them the data for training purposes. And they are kind of mutually reliant. So that is a kind of unique feature where actually it's not frequently seen in traditional supply chain literature. And we have this new training policy. So now with this new data training policy, developers or say the foundation model providers, they cannot train developers' data. So somehow they used to maybe have 1 gigabyte of data, but I only have 0.5 nowadays. So there is a kind of data constriction, which kind of if you have less data, so it will discourage your incentive to better perform your model. And on the other hand, it can mitigate privacy concern because consumer don't need to worry about privacy at all. And then the developers may leverage such an advantage to do some more customizations. Because previously they need to contribute the data to the provider, but if they do not need to do that, they can probably use it for better customizations. So that is like a key trade-off we're planning to capture over here. So here we raise 3 different questions. So first of all, we want to analyze with this new data governance policy, so whether it really benefits like the provider or does it hurt them to developing their model performance? And also, how about their API user fee, or how about the service price? And then overall, because every policy aims to protect consumers. So how about consumers in this case? If the data are not trained by the foundation model provider, will consumer end up at a higher surplus? So this is actually my first time, just as a side note, as my first time presenting in between 2 industry talk. And as a modeler, and also creates a lot of pressure to me because no model is perfect, and we're trying to capture reality, but it's really for trackability or any other reasons, so it's really hard to capture the whole reality. But we hope our model kind of or partially capture reality at some extent. Okay, so let's talk about the model here. So for the model, we actually captured 2 key players. So one is just the AI provider like OpenAI or Anthropic or Google DeepMind, and maybe other like Amazon or Adobe OpenAI providers. And we're also trying to capture another set of group that is the developers. Those developers, just like third-party innovators, they use the OpenAI model or other providers' model to build their own specific or domain customized AI applications, like Harvey that is really expert in the legal area, or say academic or in education or other coding areas. So they build their different specific applications here. And we have for the OpenAI or say the model provider, they charge Harvard AI for a certain usage fee, because whenever you want to use my model, you need to pay me a fee. That's a fair transaction. And then after you acquire those models, you can just build it upon and with your own customized model here. And for consumers, they can subscribe either to OpenAI or the Harvard. Let's say I have a question, so it could be it's not that specific to a legal question, but it's sort of related. I can either ask OpenAI how should I deal with this case, or I can directly go to the Harvard to ask the questions. So consumers are facing 2 different options depending on what's their preferences. And if they subscribe, they need to pay a subscription fee $20 per month. So that is overall how we're going to capture reality for this game. And we capture multi-stage game, where I think I want to highlight what about the first stage. So here, a key decision about like this model is about like we're trying to capture how developers are going to differentiate among the foundation model providers. Because if I don't want to differentiate, so I couldn't compete with OpenAI because I don't collect that much data. So here we actually endogenize their location decisions. That is how far I plan to stay away from the foundation model provider. And then they decide on the fee and also the price correspondingly. And we also examine two different cases because we want to analyze whether this new policy really help everyone or at least help consumers on their end. And that is how the model looks like. So here, I just want to highlight the axis, where is the developer's location. We're going to study whether with this new policy, it's going to move farther from the provider or move closer. So that is kind of their competitive lever they can use to kind of lessen the competition. And in the main model, we capture like, it's just a hoteling model, like the other E just mentioned in the last session. So we capture how users choose different options. And then one thing I want to talk about is because with this new policy, when users use like the Harvard service, they don't need to worry about the privacy. So here, when we capture in the main model, so there's no alpha, which is the privacy concern, when the users are choosing to subscribe to the Harvard's, like those developer service. So that is a key difference, how we capture this two different regimes. And then for like just because of time, for the sake of time, I just quickly go over how we model those profit functions. So this is a very simple model because we just want to highlight what's the key trade-offs are behind this story. So it generates revenue from, for the provider, it generates revenue from two different sources as we just mentioned in the intro. So one is the subscription, the other is the API payment. And for the developer, it also can generate subscription as well, but he needs to pay for API usage fee and also about the differentiation cost. So those costs could be something like I need to fine-tune the model, or I need to instill some domain-specific knowledge, or I need to control or labeling some knowledge. So that is how we capture this cost. So that could be probably the most unique part we're trying to capture here. That is, we try to capture the absolute distance between the foundation model provider and the developer. And we also follow the rational expectation equilibrium. So because we know that a key difference for the foundation model is the value of data, right? So if you have more data, so I can provide a better model. So here we actually just consider if, like under the main model, because I couldn't train developers' data, so all my data is from myself. I can only have my own subscriber data, and that's it. But for the benchmark, because I can train developers' data, then that means I have a higher data pool. So that's a key difference over here. And for this, overall, this model, we kind of capture two different effects. One is we call it constriction effects. That's because now I have a smaller data pool. I need to compete aggressively with my competitor. I probably need to lower price, or I have to charge a higher usage fee, or I need to compete aggressively. But for the Harvard, it actually, because if you subscribe to my service, you don't need to care about privacy concern. So somehow I have a kind of privacy advantage over the other competitor. So I can use that advantage to move further from you, and also I charge a higher price. So that is a key trade-off we're planning to capture. So one is the data constriction, and one is the differentiation enhancement effect. And we derive some results. Due to time limitation, I will just quickly go over our findings. So we find that at some states, especially when consumers are of really high privacy concern, in this kind of scenario, so actually we find, although a provider cannot train developers' data right now, but it can actually gain a larger data pool because the developer actually move further from the provider. So overall, the model actually gained better performance compared to before. And we also talk about like consumer surplus, and we found that it could be worse off because the provider and the developer are going to raise price. So it's not like always better outcome. But we do identify a sweet spot where all the three parties can be better off in this case. Just a quick conclusion. So in this paper, we study like whether the data should be trained upward to the foundation model provider. And we also disclose like two different effects over here. So one is it could be because lower volume data will become like hurt the model performance, but it actually leads to higher differentiation. So overall, it may not be a bad thing here. And also for consumer, it not always be good because although it kind of alleviates privacy concern, it also make you to pay more. So that is overall what we want to deliver from this study. I hope I make it clear. And that's it. So if you have any questions, feel free to, go ahead.
So thank you. That's a wonderful, I think, great question. Congratulations. I think you presented really well. The model was good. But one question I have, so you have the foundation model and a developer. And the
yes.
thing is that if the developer provides data, it improves the foundation model. But we know there are like hundreds of thousands of developers. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So just like in a typical market, one producer changes like quantity doesn't change the market price and commodity market. You will expect the same thing here. So in your model, with a single developer, I don't think it has no impact on the foundation model's ability to improve. But of course, if it applies to all the developers, then it matters, right? So how much can you take your results from the single developer model and extrapolate to the market where there are lots and lots of developers? And maybe, taking it further, there could even be policies where some developers opt in, some developers opt out. It's a really interesting problem. But I'm just wondering how much we can learn from a single developer analysis and how it translates to the real setting.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point because we actually submitted to a conference and we see the same comments from them. Yeah, so. But anyway, I do believe this is a critical question because in modeling we couldn't, or it's really hard to capture like multiple developers at the same time. But I feel that here we're actually, yeah. Yeah, that's a very, I'm gonna probably chat with like Professor Herman later on for that. Yeah, so here actually overall, I think our results should be implied like practically or theoretically. The reason is like, so for example, like the Harvard example we just take, so it could compete with OpenAI in terms of the legal dimension. But for maybe Jasper or other Copilot, it may compete with OpenAI on the coding dimension. So it actually brings like different dimension or different domains to compete with. So I feel like we can actually draw lots of hoteling lines or different lines for.
Yeah. If you think of the total value of developer data to foundation model, right?
It's much lower, yeah.
If you think of that and you think of it as a summation of all the individual values, that's not correct. It's far lower than that. Because
yes. Exactly, yeah.
And so that's what we really want to capture.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, so I will probably talk to you later on that. Oh, go ahead.
You were interesting model. So a question about how to compare your model with traditional supply chain. In traditional supply chain research, we have seen similar phenomenon, which is like information sometimes goes upstream, right? Like retailer and you have better information about consumer than wholesaler because they just closer to consumer. The retailer can choose to whether to share the consumer information with the wholesaler, which may help wholesalers to make better product design or just quantity decisions. What do you think is the cost difference between your model and that context?
That is like a fantastic question. I had the same discussion with my co-author yesterday about how could we differentiate from the supply chain like literature. So although we kind of argue this is a mutually reliant, but what we think could be like one of the most unique part in this model is we're actually trying to capture the differentiation level of the developer. So based on our knowledge, so usually in the traditional supply chain where the retailer or like manufacturer don't really decide on like how much I want to differentiate from your products, like those kind. They just share the same product from upstream to downstream. So that's actually we want to defend ourselves. That is, we're trying to capture how the developer gonna to move closer or move farther from the foundation model service to kind of differentiate themselves. And this could be used as a competitive lever for the service. And also, we definitely also capture the privacy concern. So that is also probably another aspect we can talk about. But I think what drives here is actually capture the location decision here. Yeah, thanks for the question. Do we have more time? Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you all for the comments and listening.